Good morning everybody. Today I'm going to be reviewing Rebecca by Daphne de Maurier, and oh my gosh, this was amazing. So I have been having this on my TBRs for the last couple of months and I just kept not getting to it, so I made an effort to get to it back in February and I'm so glad I did. So this is, I think it's considered to be like a modern classic, and we're following a unnamed narrator who finds herself in this sudden desire from a widowed wealthy man called Mr. De Winter, Maxim De Winter. So her life drastically changes because originally she is kind of like a hired companion, maid sort of thing for this wealthy American woman, and then all of a sudden she's in this like life of luxury as the wife of this rich man. So things start off amazingly. They kind of are in that excited kind of like first love, for her at least, moment, honeymoon phase. Everything's different and exciting and new for her, but things change when he takes her back to the family home of the Manderley house, which is heavily influenced and kind of haunted by not necessarily the ghost in a literary sense, but the impression of the late Mrs. De Winter, Rebecca, who is the title of the novel. So our unnamed narrator is basically navigating this completely new to her lifestyle whilst feeling very within the shadow of the seamless, perfect, now deceased first wife. And that's kind of like the tone that we have for the rest of the story. So it's definitely macabre, it's very gothic, it's very dark and atmospheric in its choice of writing and its tone, and I loved every moment of it. I loved the kind of eerie vibe that it had to read. It definitely felt like I was being sucked into this kind of thrilling, anticipated story, like wondering what was going to happen. I was always on the cusp of wondering, is it literally going to be a ghost story, or is it more about atmosphere and feeling? And I really enjoyed kind of not knowing in that regard, which was awesome. I quite understood how the new Mrs. De Winter, unnamed narrator, felt. Like I appreciated how out of her depth she was, especially when you consider that a lot of the staff kept everything just how Rebecca had, particularly Mrs. Danvers, who was her kind of, not handmaid, she was like the house, she looked after the whole house basically, but definitely had a fondness for Rebecca, and you learn about that a bit more as the story evolves. But she doesn't make it easy for our new protagonist to kind of, get into the life of, you know, this new role to her. She makes it very hard for her. You know, she makes our protagonist feel really out of her depth, really unwanted, and actually quite scared. And that was quite an interesting interaction between the two of them, especially when you consider that the wife now has this status. She is, you know, up there with Maxim De Winter, and technically she should be superior in how she, you know, looks after the household, especially comparing to the head of the house servants, Mrs. Danvers. She should definitely be in a more submissive role, but really you see how quickly Mrs. Danvers takes control of our protagonist and really quite seeps in this idea that she'll never be as good as Rebecca, that Rebecca's still there like in spirit, and she's not happy. And it is, I understand how meek our protagonist would have felt, but at the same time I wanted to shake her. I just wanted to be like, come on, get a backbone, you are the lady of this house. Try and kind of muster up the courage and the strength to be like, no, I know what you're doing, psychological shit, we're not here for it, get out, you know. That never really happened, but I was rooting for it. And yeah, there was some excellent confrontations in here as well that kind of gave me that, and not necessarily just between the two of those, but other characters. And as the story kind of unravelled and you learnt a bit more about who Rebecca really was and a bit more about her story, and Maxim as well, and oh my god, it just went to depths that I was not expecting. Needless to say, I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was phenomenal. It was fantastic. I felt like we had quite a few scenes where it was more winter time and it was kind of gothic, but I felt like the gothic atmospheric vibe felt really surprisingly well done in the majority of it, because it was set in the summer, and I don't really think of gothic dark books in a summer setting. I don't know why, I always think of winter, bleak, you know, barren, but it worked. The way that du Maurier was kind of describing this oppressive, damp, wet heat that just felt so restrictive, and they were desperate for this rain. It was beautifully done. I could really feel suffocated, and it really helped with the atmosphere of the book, as well as this longing for the rain, kind of in conjunction with this longing for the truth to come out. So I felt like the height of those descriptions of the weather and how it felt to be stuck in that like really hot, humid heat just beautifully mirrored how suffocating these lies were becoming and how things were kind of ramping up and up and up. And I thought that was such a cool, like, is it simile or metaphor? I don't remember that from English, but I thought that really worked quite well. The imagery in here was just absolutely exceptional. I loved how the kind of psychology of the story felt very like dreamlike, again with that excellent description of this oppressive heat wave of the summer. It just felt like it was all a haze, like it wasn't, not that it wasn't happening, but that it just didn't feel as real because of it. And I don't know, the way it got into my head was fantastic. I felt like the themes were really well explored, specifically like when you look at the gender norms between the men and the women in this kind of era, and also the villainisation of a woman pushing against that normalcy, and kind of how they've become villainised because of that was interesting. Pushing against the patriarchal system was, yeah, an interesting theme discussed, as well as this like crazed desire to compete with the dead that our main character was feeling. Like, oh, I just felt like everything was really well done. I very much enjoyed reading this. At the end, I literally shouted "what" twice in disbelief. I just couldn't believe like how it all, I don't know, how the plot all unravelled. I was not expecting it, and the end was very abrupt, and usually I'd be like, I'm not a fan of things ending in that way, but it was done so well, and it makes me want to know more, but also I'm very satisfied that this is just a book. There was an afterword in this by Sally Booman, which was really interesting and really helped me to kind of clarify some of the more hazier things that I maybe didn't understand to the fullest when I was reading. So that was helpful, and it also kind of made me think a little bit deeper about some of the material that was in the main text of the book. And it also looks like this author, Sally Booman, has a sort of spin-off called Rebecca's Tale, so I'd potentially be interested in giving that a go, because I definitely liked how she was writing about the original work in her afterwards. So if you guys have read Rebecca's Tale by Sally Booman, do let me know if you think it's worth the read. But yeah, I think that's everything I want to talk about here now for Rebecca. Let me know if you read this and what you thought about it. I thought it was fantastic. It's definitely up there in one of my all-time favourites, I think, and yeah, this is a great one. I'd highly recommend. Kind of gutted I never studied this for school English at any point in my life, because I feel like I would have gotten a lot more I don't know, like interesting academic things out of it, but I'm glad that I enjoyed this in terms of just leisurely pleasure reading. So yeah, again, would highly recommend this. Thank you so much for watching, and I shall speak to you in another video soon. Bye.